We are back again. This is for council time on Wednesday, September 14, 2022. It is 10:11 a.m. and we will have council time and then a couple of executive sessions to fill out this morning. So with council time, we begin with public comment, and I would point out that this particular public comment is to be only on the agenda of council time that is before us. No other things that are relevant to council or to Board of Health or anybody else. This is relevant only to the council time agenda of today. So I think you know the routine. If you wish to speak and you're in the council room, indicate to staff. Or if you are online, *3 or the raised hand icon. Staff, are there any you see who wish to testify?
Chair, we do not have anybody here or online to testify.
Okay, we move to old business. Is there a motion for approval of the minutes of September 7?
Motion to approve.
Second.
Discussion, edits, changes, and hearing none, the minutes are approved as drafted. Also under old business, item 2.2 is the Gorge Commission Climate Action Plan. Kathleen?
Yes, so this was previously brought to the council probably a month ago. The Gorge Commission has requested some time at a future council time meeting to discuss the Gorge Commission Climate Action Plan. The council requested to obtain an executive summary of the report from the Gorge Commission. We did receive that executive summary and the full report that has been forwarded to the council. So the only action or decision that we're asking today is that if you would like to invite the Gorge Commission to a future council time meeting to have this conversation.
Are there comments? I presume that you've had a chance, council, to read what has been sent forward.
I did not. I looked for it. The first URL didn't work. I was having computer problems coming back from vacation, and what's purported to be an executive summary of 15 pages or so, I still haven't had a chance to find it or look at it. And I appreciate the county manager sending it out. I was confused why they just couldn't send us a real executive summary, but. So I haven't read it. I don't know what it's about.
Okay. Given that, I think we should all have read it when it comes up for discussion at the next time. I personally feel that the report is clear and that there is not a need to have the Gorge Commission members present for discussion. What do some of the rest of you think?
Madam Chair.
Councilor Rylander.
I think that their purported executive summary leaves something to be desired. In the corporate business world, if I went beyond one page, I would be sent to the showers. Saying that, the material is the material, and I don't believe that we need to have a work session with the Gorge Commission.
That is two of us. Is there further agreement on that?
I would agree.
Okay. Thank you. So we will make sure that Councilor Medvigi has the proper link before our next discussion, right? Kathleen, I know that you'll make that happen.
Yes, he should have the link now, but what I'm hearing is the council is not interested in inviting the Gorge Commission to come forward and have a conversation with council.
You heard that correctly.
Okay, thank you. We will respond back to the Gorge Commission and let them know that we have received the information and we thank them for the information, that this time the council declines or has decided not to engage in any further conversation. Thank you.
Very good. So we turn to new business, the cottage housing guide.
So I see Max Booth is on. I think he and possibly Ted will be discussing this. For those of you that we had one-on-ones on Monday, there was a brief overview on this. This is a request from DEEB, members of DEEB, regarding Cottage Housing Code Amendment. So I will turn this over to Max and Ted. I don't think April is on this morning, but the two of them will go through the outline with you this morning.
Good
Thank
morning,
you very much,
Chair.
Congress.
Oh,
Go ahead,
sorry.
Ted.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Good morning, Chair, members of the council. My name is Ted Venegas, Land Use Review Manager with Community Development. As Kathleen indicated, this is, we previously brought you a list of proposed code amendments for the biannual process for this fall. And you, with some changes, approved us moving forward. Now we are coming back to you with another proposed addition or amendment proposed by the Development Engineering Advisory Board, or DEEB, concerning cottage developments. Next slide, please. This is the DEEB request, as you can read here, that garage area and other non-living areas not be counted in the floor area thresholds for in the cottage code. And below that, you'll see the proposed language that DEEB has provided. The cross out is what will be removed, and the double underlined areas are what will be added to the code. So essentially, the square feet of garages or other non-living areas would not count toward the total square feet allowed for structures in the cottage development. We can go ahead and move on. This is the intent or purpose statement in the Cottage Development Code. I've just underlined the parts of it that pertain to massing. The first one is the purpose statement to promote sustainable development practices through smaller, more efficient housing and effective use of residential land. The second one that was underlined is to diversify the county's housing stock by providing a housing type that is affordable and that responds to changing household sizes and ages, such as retirees, small families, and single parent households. Next slide, please. So these are two of the provisions of cottage developments. The cottage housing developments may be allowed up to 200% of the maximum density of the underlying zone, including any accessory dwelling units. So with these developments, we do allow up to double the density in the zone. The second is just a rehashing of what you saw in the previous slide. This is how the language is currently in the code. Cottages shall have a minimum of 150 and a maximum of 1,600 square feet gross floor area. The maximum floor area allowed on the ground floor shall be 1,200 square feet. So the intent here is to limit the massing or size of these structures in cottage developments to meet that intent or purpose statement that we saw on the second slide. Next slide, please. And then this is the definition in the code for cottages. Cottage housing means a grouping of small single-family detached dwellings clustered around a common area and developed with a coherent plan for the entire site. So next slide. So with that, the options we bring forward for the council are to proceed with amending the code during the current biannual process with the language that the DEEB has proposed, or to include this on the next biannual process, which would be next year, either in the spring or fall, or to not work on this amendment at all at this time. And we just noted that this may need more research and discussion on the intent and purpose of the Cottage Code and how it affects Title 40. And with that, I'll stand for any questions or comments you might have. Thank you.
Madam Chair. Madam Chair.
Councilor Olson.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you. So, Max or Ted, either one, can we go back to slide 3? Okay, so I just wanted to, this second bullet point here I think is important, so that when we created this cottage housing code, it was as a result of this conversation around different types of housing types and options for our community, and it kind of falls into the housing study that we did as well, that missing middle piece. So I just, the context of, I think my questions and comments will be related to that. So if you go to slide 4, I do have some questions about the floor area. So 1,600 square feet gross floor area. Is there any limitation to how high, if there's a second floor, any limitation to square footage at all in one of these units?
Madam Chair, Member Olson, so as the code states, the ground floor limit is 1,200 square feet. And so any second floor would be the remainder of the 1,600 square feet. So essentially what we would allow with these cottage developments is what would essentially be a partial second story. So the garage, the massing on the second floor would be minimum. The intent is to not have large 2-story structures with these developments, but to have modest structures, and with potentially a partial second story, a modest partial second story that doesn't really contribute as much to the massing. So the garage, the attached garage on these structures would count largely toward that 1,200 square feet of ground floor limitation.
So if this code is passed as requested, though, the garage would not count. So then we would have the 1,200 square feet on the ground floor as the maximum, and then 400 square feet on the next floor if they wanted to go to 1,600 total square feet. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. But there's no limitation on garage size, or that would have to fit within whatever the lot size would be?
Chair Bowerman, Member Olson, correct. So if this was to move forward, one concern there might be is the size of the garage. Then, if it's not counted towards this total square feet, and that's something staff would want to take a look at. We certainly wouldn't want, massive garages on these sites either. So the garage on these sites should certainly be subservient to the massing of the house. So we would want to separately take a look at if this is approved to go forward, take a look at maximum size, square feet size for garages.
Okay, thank you. So I'll just make one kind of closing comment. I think I'm not opposed to this code change per se. I just don't think we have enough information in order to go quickly with it. I think considering it in the larger context of the housing study that we did, developers are getting 200% of the maximum density in cottage housing developments. So I think we really need to take some time and understand what this impact might be. And I certainly wouldn't want to rush it. So that's just my comment on that. I think it's a viable conversation, but I think it needs time.
I would concur with that. And in fact, I think looking at the basics of this, as you have done when you say the garage is not included, but it could be taken advantage of with the lack of it being addressed at all in the code. Those kinds of things do need to be explored. And particularly when we allow twice the density. So it's getting to where I think we need to be moving forward with caution and clarity.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Counselor?
I guess a couple of things. If I understand correctly, that this ordinance has been in place for about 10 years. So the language has been applied. It's been this way in place. Now DEEP is coming back and wanting an alteration of the language so that they, in essence, could increase the size, square footage of the house. Now, sans a good clarification of what cottage means, just my personal view is that a cottage means generally single-story, smaller size. It sort of was, I think, was outlined, and I would be concerned that with this change, that we would push to more two-story and go to larger, sort of middle-sized homes, which would go outside the boundaries of the concept of a cottage. So I just have concerns about the interpretation and how that might fit. It just doesn't seem congruous to me based on what's been in place, what's been used, and how the rules have applied.
And Madam Chair, if I could follow on.
Yes, Counselor?
Thank you. So I want to segue off of what Councilor Rhinelander just said. To give this some context, in the post-World War II housing boom across America, and I grew up in one of those, are tiny little homes that a vast majority of the World War II generation could then afford, and substantially smaller than 1,600 square feet. I consider that a medium-sized home. You know, nowadays with our proverbial McMansions and everything is so huge, and so the point I want to make is I don't want to, I want to focus and get this right. I don't want to unnecessarily delay it. We do need to get this right and make this type of housing available and not too big, especially if you exclude the garage, then a 16 square foot home is a pretty decent sized home. Now I understand that's the maximum, not the minimum. What I really want to focus on, because what makes or breaks this, I think, for the community is where they go. So up to 200% of the maximum density of the underlying zone. I think that's really where the challenge is. I think you can work out the details of minimums and maximums, one floor or two, but where the problem's going to be is where can we put them where they fit, where the existing community will not be destroyed by the 200% density increase. You know, I think, how do you legislate that? How do you identify those areas as they exist today, those communities as they exist today, that would be appropriate for this kind of development? So I would like to see some additional focus on that aspect of our code changes. I think we need this. We need as much diversity in building as we can provide to the community to get through this long-term housing challenge. So those are my comments, Madam Chair.
Would you please put up again, I believe it was the last slide on recommended choices of moving forward? So, Council, are you suggesting that we pause on working on this amendment and continue with the content, or what is your wish?
Chair?
Well,
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Councilor Lentz?
Thanks. In general, I concur with most of the comments that have been made. I think this is worth looking at, but also not something that should be rushed. It needs to be carefully considered, and definitely the point about how it might impact other sections of code is not something we should overlook. So my preference would be to the second option, to include it on the next biannual process. The current biannual process is already moving forward. This would allow the time necessary to seriously consider this.
And is that agreeable to the rest of council?
I agree with Councilor Lentz on that. I would like to see it move forward, but I'm also interested in the details from the building industry, you know, Realtors Association, DEEP, you know, all the input that I need to, the devil is in the details on this, and my only comment is, in addition to what Councilor Lentz said, is let's focus on how can we define where this would be appropriate within our county to build, in addition to the actual definitions that you've teed up today.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Councillor?
I agree we need additional information and details. I am just concerned that we don't move away from the segment this appears to be intended to help, and that is smaller, single-person couples, retirees, and smaller homes that don't need the square footage. And I just get worried that we're going to creep up into that whole middle range, and so we need to be very careful to not lose this entire cottage effort and attempt. So more information and detail would be important.
Madam Chair.
Ted or Max, I have forgotten. Is 2 times the density already in code, or is that something newly proposed by DEEP?
Madam Chair, the code already allows up to 200% of the density of the zone.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Yeah, I could not remember that for sure. So I believe we're in agreement to include this on the next biannual process.
Madam Chair, can I make one more last
ahead.
comment? Thank you. I totally agree with the conversation this morning, so I appreciate it. I would also be interested in what's driving this request from Deeb and those folks. But secondarily, as we still have our housing study, we have townhouse options there. We have some other things that I think the council will be looking at in the next year or two in terms of how we implement some of the recommendations in the housing study. So maybe this cottage housing conversation can be coupled with the other additional conversations that will be taken or having around the housing study, and what other code changes we can make, and how do we address this missing middle. So maybe this can be part of that broader conversation as well.
I think that's a good idea, because then the context is not lost. Yeah. Other thoughts before we move on? Thank you very much for the report, and we will look forward to this being included on the next biannual process.
Thank you.
Not this one. Okay, we move to the land use hearing, item 3.2.
And I believe our same staff members are going to address this. Staff have been looking at different processes to help the land use hearing process be more organized and more succinct, but still allowing for the important public testimony to move forward. So they have some suggestions they would like to talk with council this morning and get direction on moving forward.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the council. Ted Venegas, Land Use Review Manager. As Kathleen stated, this is a request that we hope will help make our meetings more efficient and, just in general operated more efficiently. So the request is, we have 2 requests here for our hearings. The first is an amendment to place time limits on the hearings. Currently in our code, for the land use hearings, we don't have limits in the code for testimony for the applicant or for the public or neighborhood associations or even staff. So the idea here is to place those something in code that would put those limits on public testimony, applicant testimony. You'll see I put some examples down below. It's not limited to that. Those are just some examples of what the testimony might be limited to. And the idea here is just to provide, again, more efficiency and streamline our hearings a little bit better. The intent is certainly not to limit public testimony at all, but if operated appropriately under this code amendment, we might actually get more and better public testimony at these hearings. The second request is to put a code amendment or amend the code to keep the public record open for an additional week after the actual hearing occurs. When COVID hit, we went completely online with our hearings, and this was something that that we started to do unofficially. It's not in the code currently. So the hearing occurs. Once the hearing is closed, we do allow the hearing, we do allow the record to stay open for an extra week. This allows the public who maybe somebody wasn't able to testify, the meeting went too late, they weren't able to stay on, or they couldn't attend, allows them to provide more, to provide that testimony, written testimony after the record closes. It also, I think importantly, allows the hearing examiner to not have to make a decision kind of on the hot seat at the hearing. He can kind of pull back, take all the information, absorb all the information that was provided more thoughtfully, and take that week and make a decision. Part of that process would also be to allow the applicant to provide any rebuttal to any additional information provided during that week. Next slide, please. So again, some of the purposes here of time limits, it will make the hearings more efficient by reducing the length of the hearings. It will limit budget impacts associated with extended hearings. So sometimes these hearings will go to 11 o'clock or sometimes later, depending on when the hearing examiner wants to shut down the hearing. So all staff in attendance are on these meetings until that time, of course. It will reduce the need for continued hearings, which impacts time and budget. So sometimes these hearings, due to lengthy public testimony or lengthy applicant testimony, these hearings can tend to reach their limit, and they need to get pushed to another hearing date, which takes up space on that hearing date. This would hopefully reduce some of the need to continue those hearings to other dates and maybe settle the hearing in that one hearing time. And it provides equity and fairness in public testimony, as I indicated previously. With time limits, more people will be able to testify, and it will provide more efficiency in that testimony. On the open record, I talked a bit about this already. It will provide additional opportunity for public testimony, and it'll allow the hearing examiner more time to review the record and testimony before making a decision. So the request is permission to proceed with the process to amend the code to include land use hearing time limits and to keep the public record open for an additional week. If the council directs staff to proceed with this, we will work on specific language for these amendments and then return to another council work session for further direction. Thank you.
Comments from council?
Madam Chair,
Yes, Councilor Rylander.
I am in support of placing limits and controls, not to cut testimony off at all, but just to keep things manageable. I am concerned that there could be situations where a group may actually use this as a filibuster situation, which would not be productive. So I don't know, does the code need to specify guidance on the time limits specifically, or is that going to be left up to each hearing examiner? And could you have wide variations in what hearing examiners allowed, which could then cause issues of concern? So maybe some clarity along that line.
Thank you, Councilor. Yeah, the idea is what we would probably do is look at best practices from other similar communities and see how those work. I mean, I think the idea would be to put these limits in place into code, but also provide the flexibility of the hearing examiner to allow some extra time. So if a member of the public is testifying and they're staying on point, but they need to just finish up their point and go over time, the hearing examiner can, of course, allow them to go further. And same with the applicant. The hearing examiner can allow extra time for the applicant to clarify. So there will be, the idea is to provide some flexibility for the hearing examiner. Currently, the code is written in a way that the hearing examiner runs the meeting, and so how those meetings are run is completely up to the hearing examiner. I will add that we met with both of our hearing examiners, and they are completely on board with providing some of these limitations in the code, because it gives them a tool to use. So they can say, if somebody does, as you mentioned, start to sort of filibuster the meeting a little bit, they have the code to lean on to cut them off, and it doesn't look like it's something arbitrary coming from them necessarily. So part of that language will have some firm time limits in there, but the language will also provide some flexibility for the hearing examiner.
Thank you, and I certainly support what your suggestion is here, and for you to move forward with the language on the amendments, and particularly given the notion of keeping the public record open for a week. That is a marvelous compliment, I think, to the remainder of what you are suggesting. So I personally would give this one thumbs up. Are there others? There's two. I can't see. I think Councilor Rylander
Yes.
gave that a thumbs up. Yes, he did. Okay, very good. So that is the go ahead. And unless there are further comments from council, I think we're ready to go.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next, we move to councilor reports. Are there any?
Madam Chair.
Councilor Rylander?
So just a few moments. I spent yesterday afternoon out in Battleground at the transit meeting and the committee, and listened to presentations by the various cities, La Center, Ridgefield, and Battleground. Specifically, the Cowlitz Indian Tribe came over and gave a presentation and indicated that they would very much like to engage in support of roads and transportation issues within roughly a 15-mile circumference around their properties. So I managed to drop a business card off. I know, Madam Chair, you're already involved with them, but I took the opportunity to leave a business card with them as well and indicate that certainly we'd be open to chatting and discussion. So it was a good general meeting. There is a session today, and I have 3 people keeping an eye on things for me, and they're providing me their notes in the background. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. Are there other councilor reports? How about work session requests? I believe there are none.
That is correct.
How about Lindsay Hure, report on policy issues?
One thing I wanted to update you on is the Vancouver Lake. I know you received an open letter from the Friends of Vancouver Lake, and just wanted to let you know that I spoke to them yesterday, or to the consultant yesterday, and they're going to be taking some of the information from the letter and incorporating that into their work plan. They also clarified that they are going to continue to have a focus on the flushing channel, so that I think at the meeting it may not have come across that way. So they just wanted to clarify that they will continue to have a focus on the flushing channel, and they have heard the concerns from the Friends of Vancouver Lake, and they're going to be modifying a couple of things and incorporating that into the final work plan. I should receive the final draft of the final work plan here in the next couple of days, and I'll be sure to circulate that to everybody so you can take a look at it, if you have any additional feedback.
Are there questions for Lindsay about that? Okay, thank you very much, Lindsay. So now we move into executive session. We have 2 of them. The first is per RCW 42.30.110, item 1G for about 15 minutes, and then an item on collective bargaining for about 20. So it is now 10:45. This would be 35 minutes, but it will take us at least 40 to go in and out of the sessions. So how about if we come back at 11:25? Is that correct?
11:30?
11:30 sounds even better. Okay, let's make it 11:30. And we will come back at that time, not necessarily for action to be taken, but at least to adjourn the council time meeting at that point. So thank you, and council, see you at executive session.
Council is extending their executive session for another 15 minutes and will be returning at 11:45. Thank you. Hello, the council is extending executive session for 5 more minutes and will be returning at 11:50. Thank you. Hello, council is extending executive session for 5 more minutes and will be returning at 11:55. Thank you.
This is Wednesday, September 14. This is the Clark County Council coming back into the council time agenda, having completed 2 executive sessions. The attorneys were present. However, we do not have after action to be taken following those executive sessions. So we are simply back into council time for the purpose of adjournment. So this meeting is adjourned.